Welcome to another episode of Becoming a Techno Wizard. I almost forgot the name. I do too many Techno Wizard stuff. So I did not read this over the week. So we're just gonna leave off right. Pick up right where I left off. Talking about introductory presentations. So if you recall, if you don't recall, just watch the last one, and we're gonna jump right into it. Here we go. Introductory presentations. When you're kicking off a project, it's worth taking time for an introductory presentation. It's good to get authors, software developers, interaction designers, visual designers, marketing folks, and managers all on the same page in understanding the following issues. What is information architecture and why is it important? How will the information architecture relate to the other components of the information environment and to the organization itself? What are the major milestones and deliverables? This is some great information. I'm gonna use this because I think it's tomorrow or Thursday. I'm actually gonna be talking to some folks for that OMI group that I talked about. I think I mentioned this before, but working with the Open Metaverse Interoperability group to create a website. So we're trying to figure out what should be on the website and all this other stuff. And we had some like group based kind of frameworks where people were just throwing in ideas for what should be on here. But I think it needs to be a more structured approach here where yes, you're taking everybody's ideas in, to get an understanding of what should be on the page. But as for what should be where and how it should be accessed and all this other stuff, we need a better structure for that. So these are some good questions to ask people. So definitely, I like this. Super practical. These presentations and the discussions they provoke can identify potential landmines and foster productive relationships between teams. They are especially useful in building a common vocabulary that helps people communicate with one another more successfully. Yeah, that's huge. Like that common vocabulary is something that is kind of undervalued, where it's kind of known that different companies and different organizations have their own voices, right? And I actually was listening to not a podcast, but like a episode, of Delta CX with Debbie Levitt, and she was interviewing some or talking with some UX writers, and they were talking about how different companies have different voices. Like if you're on a 404 page, if you're lost, everybody's kind of copying somebody else's page when it says, how did you get here, right? Like, or this shouldn't happen. Like, that's clearly a example where people didn't have their own voice and they didn't think about what their company sounds like and what it should say there. They were just copying somebody else. Versus other pages, 404 pages, when you're lost or something like that, and it's unique to that. Like GitHub, I think, has a unique one where it's like, oh, I'm not sure exactly what it says, but it's very unique. And, they have their own kind of visuals there, and what it says. Discord, very kind of fun way of doing it. Even I have a unique 404 page where I have a fun fact about Timbuktu. Like Timbuktu wasn't in the middle of nowhere. It was actually a kind of scholarly mecca, and they pointed that out from here to Timbuktu because it's like the edge of the world, the known world that people were used to, and it was like an El Dorado type of situation. But anyways, it's that voice you have to get through. So this common vocabulary, I kind of see that as the same type of thing. It's like, how does your company or organization communicate what's important to you? How do you all talk about what's the common things? Like, do you call it do you call, for instance, your homepage? Do you call it your homepage, or do you call it your dashboard, or do you call it your command center, whatever? Most people, of course, are going to call it home, but what if you have fun with it? That's an easy example, or just a simple example, but there's a lot of things that can be shared. So yeah, I know I'm talking a lot, but that's the whole point of this. It's for me to kind of work through this stuff and share what I'm thinking. Anyways, research meetings. In the early 1990s, we held full-day marathon meetings with our clients' web teams. With our clients' web teams. What clients this is? I'm sorry. With their clients' web teams. It's been a long day. I'm just having fun at this point. With our clients' web teams to learn as much as possible without mission, vision, audience, content, and infrastructure. And did I say without or about? See, I told you it's been a long day. Goodness. and to begin fleshing out a framework for the information architecture. In those days of small, centralized web design teams, one mammoth research meeting would often suffice. Today, the design and production of information rich products and services is often more complicated, involving several teams drawn from different departments. This distributed reality may call for a series of targeted research meetings. Consider the following 3 meetings and their agendas. Strategy team meeting. In many organizations today, there's a centralized strategy team or working group that's been tasked with management of digital products and channels. It is this strategy team that sets the high-level goals, defining the mission, vision, intended audience, content, and functionality. This is the group that deals with the big balancing act between centralization and autonomy. I really wonder how many of these strategy teams have designers? Or is it just like some executives, some sales people, some marketing folks, some creative folks, that are like, oh yes, what if we do this? Let's do this, Yeah, maybe some of them, I'm probably not being generous here. Maybe some of them actually have some data, to work behind. But I find it really, I've been talking to a lot of designers recently and kind of researching in the field. And it seems like, unfortunately, a lot of these folks who decide what gets made, what's the mission, the mission, vision, intended audience, the content, and functionality, that's not being determined by the designers, the people whose job it is to research and to figure out how to solve problems, to find problems and then solve them. Like it's sad, but they're not in those strategy teams. So like, who's really in those strategy teams, and how did they come up with that information? I don't know. So to continue, because of the need to establish trust and respect, face-to-face meetings with this team are essential. Only by having these meetings will you learn about the real goals of the project and the hidden landmines in your path. And only during face-to-face conversations will you reach a comfort level that allows both you and your colleagues to ask the difficult but necessary questions. It's important to keep these meetings small and informal. 5 to 7 people is ideal. If the group gets too large, political correctness takes over and people won't talk. Interesting. So yeah, that's like, and I know people, that's kind of people use political correctness in very political ways, quote unquote, nowadays. But really, it's, the fact that when, you have certain teams, like you have a large team, people might not want to step on toes, or they do want to step on toes and being unnecessary and things like that. So it's interesting that they said, small and formal, because that kind of shows you that you need to kind of just be like, hey, let's kind of work with people's what times people have and things like that. So that's very interesting. As far as the agenda goes, you'll want to hit on some of the following questions. What are the goals for the system? Who are the intended audiences? What is the planned content and functionality? What channels will people use to access the system? Who will be involved in this effort? When do you need to show results? What obstacles do you anticipate? Great questions indeed. However, the key in these meetings is to follow your nose. Be ready to dig deeper into the most interesting and important topics that come up. The worst thing you can do is rigidly stick to a formal agenda. Yes, this reminds me of doing qualitative research, Yes, you have a discussion guide and you have some questions that you want to ask, but especially if it's semi-structured or unstructured, interview, you want to follow what people are saying. Like, you don't want to just be like, oh yes, I have this question, and they say some interesting things, but you just go on to the next. No, you want to follow up with that. Like, okay, well, can you tell me more about that? Like, how did that happen? Or, what do you mean by that? And things like that. So that's awesome that this is included here. Think of yourself as a facilitator, not the dictator. Yeah. And don't be afraid to let the discussion wander a bit. You'll learn more, and everyone will have a more enjoyable meeting. Content management meeting. The content owners and managers are the people you'll want to engage in detailed discussions about the nature of the content and the content management process. These people typically have lots of hands-on experience and a perspective more informed by bottom-up realities. Beautiful. If you can establish a rapport, you might learn a lot about the culture and politics of the organization as well. Questions for these folks include, what are the formal and informal policies regarding content inclusion? Is there a content management system that handles authoring and publishing? Do those systems use controlled vocabularies and attributes to manage content and attributes to manage content? How is content entered into the system and by whom? What technology is being used? What contents does each owner handle? What is the purpose of the content? What are the goals and vision behind the content area? Who is the audience? They have a lot more questions here. This is awesome. How will the audience access the system? What is the format of the content? Is it dynamic or static? Who maintains the content? What future content or services are planned? Where does content originate? How is it weeded? What legal issues impact the content management process? Yeah, wow. So I think, they have more questions here because, these are bottom up. So they see, all the everyday things. And this is another problem with strategy, like the quote unquote strategy teams, is like, again, who are they? Like, what do they do on a regular basis? And especially because oftentimes, like they pointed out here, it's not them who are bottom up. Like, they're not, doing the customer service. They're not, doing the research. They might not have an idea of what the everyday consumers are dealing with or using. Yes, I know it's important to have that 10,000 foot view or 30,000 foot view. That oversight to see everything from a distance. But if they never or rarely, are at the bottom and see that, then, what information do they really have? And maybe I'm just, again, kind of taking this because I've been reading a lot about anarchism and flat structures, or rather horizontal, structures rather than strictly vertical. So maybe I'm just biased, but I don't know. These are some great questions, though. So, information technology meeting. You should meet with the system administrators and software developers early on to learn about the existing and planned technical infrastructure that will support the product. This provides a good opportunity to discuss the relationships between information architecture and technical infrastructure, as well as to build trust and respect. Remember, you depend on these folks to forge a connection between ideas and implementation. Questions include, will we be able to leverage content management software? How can we create the necessary infrastructure to support tagging? Yeah. Does a CMS handle automated categorization of documents? What about automated index generation? What about personalization? How flexible is the search engine? Will the search engine support integration of a thesaurus? How do we get regular access to search logs and usage analytics? These are great questions. Once again, I learned a couple years ago because I was looking for jobs, and there's this one company called Algoria, I think it's called, and they basically create search engines as a service. And what I learned from that, researching that company, is that this is a whole industry where people create search engines and try to figure out what the best way to create a search engine. It's not just Google, right? Because you have an internal need for it, or you have your own database and things like that. Like, how do you search that? That's not what Google's for. Google's for the overall web. Or even if you have, an internal web, an intra web, how do you search that? So that you're looking for the best in your directory or in your database. How do you, I'm not sure if I talked about it in these videos, but earlier in the book, they talked about how when you're searching things, you want to, there's different ways of searching, right? There's different ways of optimizing for searches. If you're searching for more accuracy or more results, right? More accuracy is usually going to be less results because you're going to cut what you're looking for. Like if you type in, red, are you going to pull up anything with the word red in it, or any word with any sentence with the word red, or any word with the phrase with the letters red in it, like Reddit? Would that pop up in your search? So it's super interesting in that what your kind of philosophy for that search engine is, and what your technical limitations are for vastly changes how that search experience feels. So you might have seen this if you're on Amazon or any e-commerce site or any other site where you're searching for something and you come up with some weird search results. Like, how do they get that? It's probably because they had a specific type of search engine thing where your query just didn't happen to work with how they were thinking about people, how they thought people would search. And so if you have a lot of these, the question is, do they go back and look at these search logs? This is why the user analytics, do they go back and look at these search logs to see how many dead end searches are there? How many people search things that don't come up with results? Because that's the worst thing. And how do you solve that? So super interesting. Unfortunately, the IT groups in many organizations are swamped with work and don't have the time to support information architecture and usability efforts. That's why this won't work. It's important to identify this problem early and develop a practical, realistic solution. Otherwise, your whole effort can stall when implementation time arrives. And that's 15 minutes, right on the dot. So I ended there. And thanks for listening, for watching. I know these are very weird, kind of long, or rather short, but I'm just going all over the place. But once again, if you want to read it yourself, get the book, read it yourself, and have a great day. Yeah. Information architecture is awesome. See you. Bye-bye.